This is an interview with Mrs. C.B. Northcutt, a pioneer of Oklahoma. This tape recording is being made on the 3rd day of March, 1956, at 505 B Street Southwest in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Mrs. Northcutt was born in Ida Grove, Iowa, and moved to Mangum, Oklahoma, where she graduated from high school in 1907. Mrs. Northcutt, speaking of travel, could you tell me how you came all the way down from Iowa?
We came to Mangum on the first train out of Oklahoma City into Mangum. It was the old Rock Island train. Took us all day long from Oklahoma City to Mangum, 100 miles.
Did you have to stop for any of the buffalo or anything in the way of the tracks, or what was the reason for taking the whole day?
Well, the engines didn't go so fast then as they do now. They just didn't make the time. And then we stopped at every station on the way down, no matter how large or small it was, and stayed just as long as the trainman wanted to visit a while with a depot agent.
What was he doing, just showing off his train or something?
Well, they just weren't in a hurry.
Well, what did you do after you got to Mangum? Did you set up the house there or have a little store or something?
No, my father was in the real estate business. In fact, he was working on a newspaper first, the old Mangum Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to live in a tent for the first few months until we could get a house built.
That was kind of rough living, I guess. In our earlier interviews, you said something about or asked you about the swimming holes in those days, and you said there wasn't any. Well, what kind of sanitary problems were there in those days? It's kind of rough, I guess.
Yes, they didn't have the sanitation that they have now. They had no running water in the house. We drew our water from wells in the yard. In fact, in the square, they had a deep well where lots of folks got water that couldn't get it at their own home. And then also in the square, they had the water trough for the cows and horses that came through town or came to town from the farm.
Mrs. Northcutt, could you tell me about the first telephone that you had there in Mangum?
Well, we had lived in Mangum about 5 years before the Bell Telephone Company decided to put in telephones in the homes. There were just one or two telephones in town just for use for long distance. And we had the first telephone put in our house in Mangum. It was number 2, however. Number 1 was taken by the central girl, Ms. Belle Shearer.
That was telephone number 2.
Number 2 was telephone. We had that all the 20 years that we lived there.
Could you believe it hardly, or could you believe it whenever you could talk to somebody there?
We were a good deal excited about it, and always tried to see which one would get to the telephone first when the telephone rang. Or else we would call somebody up and talk to them just to try it out.
Well, is that the way you got your news? Could you talk to anybody in Oklahoma City or something like that? Was it very expensive?
Well, I don't ever remember putting in long-distance telephone calls while I was at Mangum. They were very expensive, and they were just used for emergencies or something like that.
Well, how did you get your, the newspapers? Did they come through? Could you hear about what was happening over the rest of the United States?
Well, we had the Dallas Morning News and the Daily Oklahoman, and then we had a newspaper in Mangum once a week. Otherwise, that's the only way we found out about anything.
They came in on the stagecoach, didn't they?
Yes, they had to come over land.
Did the stagecoach run from, I guess it was from Oklahoma City, maybe once or twice a week, wasn't it?
Well, after the railroad came, of course, they did away with the stagecoach, but even after the railroad came, the stagecoach came in from Vernon, Texas, and from the south.
From the south?
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me about the first automobile you ever saw, Mrs. Northcutt.
Well, the first automobile in Mangum was a 4-wheeled buggy-type automobile with a rod for a steering wheel, and made an average of about 10 miles an hour down the main street. Just a doctor there had it, and it was caused quite a commotion, scared all the horses, and lots of the children scared of it too.
What did the doctor think about it? Did he like riding in his car?
He liked it fine, and he thought he was about the biggest man in town when he was driving down with an automobile.
Well, it didn't make him kind of snobbish or anything, did it?
No, but we accused him of it because he was afraid to take his eyes off the road because he's afraid the automobile will get away from him.
Did the people think that going very fast in those days, say 40 or 50 miles an hour, would be harmful to the body? Or did they ever believe
well,
you'd go
they
that
just
fast?
didn't ever believe you'd go that fast at all because sometimes you didn't make much better time than they did with a horse and wagon. I know one time, and then another thing, the farmers resented the automobile.
Oh, they did?
Yes, they did, and they wouldn't get out of the road, and we didn't have roads wide enough to go around them. And unless they'd pull off the side of the road and let a car go by, why, we just had to stay behind them. And I remember the first automobile that we had of our own, and I drove, we went down a narrow road, and this team man with the farm wagon and the horses wouldn't move over. One reason they didn't move over is because if the car went by them, it scared their horses, you see, and they didn't want to. So we just got up behind his wagon and pushed it along with the car until he moved over. But it was kind of bad for the farmers. The automobiles did scare their horses, and they make them run away.
Well, that must have been in about what year?
That was about 1905.
1905.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where did they park the cars downtown? Were there very many in the city of Magnum?
No, they never did park them downtown. You didn't drive a car to town. You walked to town. Only time you drove a car is when you was going out of town.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll swan. Well, they had hitching posts there for all the
Yes.
horses there in the middle of town, didn't
Oh,
they?
yes. When the farmers came to town, well, they had their hitching posts where the farmers, or wagon yards, where they didn't want to put them in the wagon yard. Well, they just hitched them to the post. If they weren't going to stay long in town, they used the hitching post. If they was going to stay all day or all night, well, they used the wagon yard.
Now, give me a description of the city. I would like to know how the buildings looked and what was on every corner and things like that.
Well, they were all wooden buildings and one-story buildings. It is built on a square, like Ardmore was built on a square to start with. And this well I was telling you about is in the middle of the square. And, of course, no pavement, no sidewalks. And they rode their horses through this square and made wagon tracks or cow tracks for the horses coming to get water. Very few trees at that time, too.
Was it all level out there?
Yes, all level.
How about the saloons? Were there very many?
There's a saloon on every corner.
Uh-oh. That made for good drinking, I guess, the people drank.
Well, they were not supposed to sell to minors, but the minors got it anyway. But I would like to say this, that in 1907, when Oklahoma and Indian Territory came in as a state, they outlawed liquor.
Mm-hmm.
And from 1907 until the Prohibition law of the United States was done away with, there wasn't as much drinking.
Is that right?
Not near as much as when they had the saloons. In fact, I had a nephew who was 12 years old, born during that time, and he was 12 years old before he ever saw a drunk man.
Well, I sworn to goodness. Well, it wasn't very safe in the city of Magnum on a Saturday night then.
Not before, not when the saloons were there. The girls and women were not allowed to go downtown at night by themselves. They had to be chaperoned. In fact, the girls had to be chaperoned all the time, anytime.
Well, I heard a lot about we're getting off the subject and on to the subject of cattle. I heard a lot about the cattle drives. Remember one day last week we had a calf in the back of a pickup. We drove across Main Street, and the people looked at us kind of funny. Well, in those days, didn't they just drive the whole herds right down the middle of the streets?
Right through town. Everybody just got out of the way when they saw them coming.
Well, where were they going?
Well, usually we're going from south toward Vernon to the Dodge City, Kansas.
Dodge City, Kansas.
We were not on the what they call the Chisholm Trail, but there was a trail that came from Texas through Mangum going to Kansas.
I see. Well, I guess it was 200 or 300 head of cattle that come through every time, wasn't it?
Oh yes, they had in the spring and the falls when they'd have those drives, and they would be lots of cattle.
Chuck wagons come along right behind bringing
Yes,
the food.
chuck wagons always stop there at Mangum and maybe stay all night or have their noon meal there. Forget about the Indians.
Oh yeah. In our earlier interview, you said something about the Indians who used to come into the shop there, a little grocery store I believe you and your husband had. Could you tell me about that?
Well,
and so forth.
The Indians at that time were blanket Indians, and they had their feathers, long feathers. The men folks did, and dressed up. They came there to get their government money. At that time, that was before statehood. At that time, the government was paying their allotments, you see. And they'd come twice a year and camp right outside Mangum to get their government money. And they would have to do them again. And they'd always have these Indian dances and they just made a regular picnic of it for about a week.
Did they get drunk or anything?
Well, I don't remember those Indians getting drunk, now, to tell you the truth. There was a law that they were not supposed to sell whiskey to the Indians. That was even before statehood, because it was a government law. I mean, United States law that they couldn't sell to. However, I imagine they did, but I don't ever remember seeing them. What I remember about them mostly was their colorful dress, and they were very well behaved, ones that I saw.
Well, did you have any contact with them, talk to them, or trade with them, or anything like that?
Well, yes. Everyone always, when they camped out what we called our fairgrounds out the edge of town, always made it a point to go out and see them or talk with them. You want me to tell about that ride I had
sure
with
do.
it?
I'd like to hear that.
I went out late one evening and thought I'd, with a little horse and a delivery wagon, and thought I would see some of them. And I found a squaw and about 4 or 5 children walking to town. So I thought I'd pick them up and bring them into town. And about that, as soon as they got in the wagon beside me, the gnats began to swarm around us.
Uh-oh.
So I whipped up the horse so we'd get to town, get away from the gnats.
Well, they weren't very sanitary then. I guess, like we said a while ago about the rivers and all, there wasn't very many to take a bath in.
No, they just had no place to take a bath unless they did go to places in the river that were deep enough to wade or swim in.
I see. Well, let's go back just a little bit further and talk about school a little while. You graduated in 1907, I believe. Could you tell me what the school looked like and what you studied and just a general description of going to high school?
Well, we had great, tall, 2-story buildings for school buildings, and the teachers were very strict on the children, and the parents backed the teachers up. If teacher gave you a whipping at school, well, you got another one when you got home. And this Professor E.E. Dale at Oklahoma University was one of our professors in, I think it was what you'd call junior high now.
Yes.
Before we got in before we got in senior high. Our high school then was another 2-story building on the same lot. And we had all 4 high school classes in one room under one principal. And then we had 2 or 3 other teachers who took different classes at different times. But it wasn't exactly like they have in high school now.
I see. What did you study when you went to high school?
Well, we had to get reading, spelling, arithmetic. We had, at last year in high school, we were required to take 1 year of Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, there was nothing. We had, when we read, we had to stand up before the class, read out loud, and read what the teacher told us to read without a mistake. If we made one mistake, we had to read it over again until we could read it without a mistake. What I mean is you had to pay attention to punctuation marks and the pronunciation of the words.
I see. Did you take any Latin in high school?
Yes, we did take Latin. We took Latin 2 years, I believe.
2 years of Latin?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how many kids went to school?
Well, I don't believe in all 4 grades there was over 60.
Over 60?
When I was going, there was only 7 in my class.
That was the graduating class?
The graduating class of 1907, there were 7 in it, 5 boys and 2 girls.
I see.
And the girls had a pretty rough time.
They did. Well, that made the city of Mangum about, let's see, 5,000 or 6,000. Would you say that?
Well, it might be that much. Not anymore.
Did they have any kind of fire department?
Yes, they had a horse-drawn fire department.
I see. Well, where did you meet Mr. Northcutt?
I met him when I first came to Mangum in 1900.
Mm-hmm.
We went to school through all till we graduated together.
When did you get married? Right after that?
No, he was in the Navy 4 years, and after he got out of the Navy, I was in college and he was in the Navy. And when we got back from the Navy, we got married.
Where did you go to college?
Oklahoma City University now, but at that time it was called Epworth University.
Epworth. Mm-hmm. That's the Epworth League. Is that where they got that?
Well, it was a Methodist school, and it still is a Methodist school, but they changed the name from Epworth University to Oklahoma City University Oklahoma City would help them, financially.
I see. Speaking of churches, what kind of church meetings did you have out in western Oklahoma?
You mean in Mangum?
Right.
Well, I guess we had the same kind they had at that time almost anywhere in Oklahoma. We had church services all day Sunday and Wednesday night prayer meetings, and then we had our Epworth League, over at Epworth League. And then during the summer, we always had revival meetings. Mm-hmm. We had tent meetings or what we call brush arbor meetings.
We were talking here a while back about Christmas, and you said something about meeting in the church and having one big Christmas tree. Well, that kind of differs from the day now where everybody has a Christmas tree. Could you give us a little more detail on that?
Well, I don't remember ever having a Christmas tree in the home. We always saved our Christmas for the church Christmas tree. And I don't remember anyone having Christmas in the home until, after my children were grown. We always hung up our stockings at home. We'd get a little candy and stuff in our stockings, but our big Christmas was Christmas Eve at the church with a big Christmas tree, and everybody invited, and families came together to this Christmas tree. They had a program usually of songs, and Christmas songs, and maybe a little play or something like that. But
well, nearly everybody went to church in that time, didn't they?
Yes, it seemed to me like they did, everyone that could go to church.
Was there one church or 2 or 3 different denominations?
No, we had several denominations. We had the Baptist and the Methodist and the Christian, I believe that I remember first. Mm-hmm. Presbyterian, too.
Did you ever go out of town for any of the meetings like that?
They didn't have meetings out of town like
this. Just a community meeting right there?
That's right. It was too hard to, horse and buggy, take too long to go to meetings like they do now.
Well, this is another question. In another interview with another lady, they went out of town down by the river and had a watermelon feast or something. Did you all ever have anything like that?
Well, now, one thing we did have, we had what we called Sunday school picnics. Sunday school teachers took all the Sunday school children to the river or to a town, Granite, about 12 miles away. But that's about as far as we get because, you see, it takes so long to go in wagons that you didn't have much time to spend if you went too far away.
I see. Well, where did you live in the city? I believe you lived across from some famous star, didn't you?
Well, I lived across from Ike Rood, Sam Rood's family. Ike was his son, and he was a champion roper, cowboy in rodeos. He was even in Madison Square Gardens. That is when we first went there, and then they sold their place right across from us to the Methodist people, and they built the Methodist church on this place across from us.
Well, we're going to skip around here on the notes we took. About back to school again. You said they had very strict rules on stealing. What was the punishment if you stole a pencil or something like that? What did you all do?
Well, if anyone stole a pencil and they couldn't get the child to own up to it, well, we sat in school after school was out until someone owned up that they had stolen that pencil. And I know that the boys used to get lots of paddlings, whippings with whips, tree limbs. And I'm not sure that after the child owned up, whether he got a whipping for it. I imagine he did. He knew he'd get a whipping for it if he owned up, but the teacher wouldn't let us get out of school till he owned up to it, so usually some other child or two in the room knew who did it, and they'd put the pressure on him to own up so we could get out of school. But they taught, in those days, honesty. I believe they taught...
that above all?
That's right. That's right. I sure did.
How about the Bible in school?
We always had Bible reading every morning in school, all the way through school, even in high school. That opened every morning's work.
I believe you said you did some teaching later on in life, and the mornings that you didn't read the Bible, the day went wrong. Is that right?
Well, I felt like it did. Even later on, it seemed like the reading the Bible quieted the children and made them kind of think about things if they were inclined to be a little mischievous.
Did you ever do any teaching in school for religiously, or was it just the Bible or prayer and opening services? Is that all?
No denominational teaching, just the Bible.
I see.
Just the truths of the Bible, and I think, yes, that ought to be put in the schools.
Okay. We have in Ardmore High School a thought for the day by some boy or girl, and he reads a verse or two out of the Bible, but there are no teachings, denominational or anything like that. But it isn't the teacher doing the Bible reading out of each class like I would like to have it. We used to have it whenever we went in junior high, and it was very relaxing.
Well, I think it would help the teacher and the pupils both if they could have just 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes even of just Bible readings, but not. I don't think they should teach the denominational theories and things like that.
Well, do you believe they should teach about communism so that we would know the difference in what is right and wrong?
Right off, I'd say no, because it would just be like somebody going and getting drunk just to see how it felt to get drunk. I don't think they need to do that.
Okay. What about the clothes you all wore to school?
Well, we really dressed up. We wore long dresses, long stockings, long sleeves, and a sunbonnet. We were not allowed to go outdoors even without our sunbonnet on. And that was in high school too. It wasn't down in the grade schools.
Well, didn't it get kind of hot out there in western Oklahoma wearing all those clothes?
Yes, but we didn't think much about it. Didn't think about being hot.
It was hotter in the sun without your bonnet than it was with it on?
Seemed like it was, all right. I think the bonnet shaded you, but the main thing was they felt like too much sun would not be good for you.
I see.
And then another thing is at that time, why it was, the whiter your skin was, the better people thought you were, the more popular you'd be. So if the sun hit you, it might turn you a little brown, and
That didn't go over so good.
No.
What about the time you and another little girl walked into school with your sleeves rolled up?
Well, we were promptly sent out to roll our sleeves down, and before we left the room, the teacher said to the whole class that the only time a girl should roll up her sleeves is when she's washing dishes.
Is that right? Well, I believe you have some history books there, Mrs. Northcutt, and if I'm not mistaken, you were at the mock wedding of Oklahoma and Indian Territory back in 1907, I believe. Would you go into detail on this?
Well, I was in school at that time. It was my first year in college, and my father was in politics in Greer County at the time, so he came up to Oklahoma City and took me with him to Guthrie to see this ceremony and this big celebration that they were having in Guthrie. And they had a big platform out on the steps of the courthouse, I believe it was, and Governor Hartsell at that time was inaugurated as the first governor of the combined Indian Territory in Oklahoma. And the thing that I remember about it, and the thing that impressed me so much, was the mock wedding of Miss Indian Territory and Mr. Oklahoma. And I'm still going to try to find out who they were. I can't find it in any history books. I know I can see them now standing on that platform, and I don't know but what Bill Murray was the man that married them. They went through the ceremony, of course, not like a wedding ceremony, but through a ceremony of uniting Indian Territory and Oklahoma. And this Indian girl was dressed in the Indian wedding costume, and the cowboy was dressed as an Oklahoma cowboy. Mm-hmm. And she was very pretty, and he was tall, as I remember it, and they had that as part of the ceremonies of that day. And of course, that day marked the end of selling liquor in Oklahoma. At midnight, the night of that night, they had to pour out or give away all the whiskey that anybody had. And of course, I don't remember seeing anybody drunk, but they say that quite a lot of them tried to drink all they could because they might not get a chance to again.
That was held in the main street of Oklahoma City?
No, it wasn't. It was in Guthrie. I was thinking it was in Oklahoma City, but it was in Guthrie. In 1907.
About how many people were there?
Well, to me, there was a large crowd at that time, but nothing like the crowds that I've seen since then. I imagine there was, several thousand people there all day long. And so many came that they had a big barbecue, free barbecue, and so many came that they ran out of barbecue, and then they had to go, and they had the National Guard was there, and they came to the ceremonies and, helped police the crowd. And after it was over, they hadn't had anything to eat. Well, all the barbecue was gone. They had to go down in town, and all they could get was bacon and eggs.
Is that right? That was kind of a blow. Do you have anything in those books there that you'd like to talk about?
Well, Governor Hartsell was the first governor, and then Lee Cruse was the second governor. He was from Ardmore. I remember most all the governors all the way down. This R.L. Williams was a brother to our pastor that was here several years ago.
Was that right? Not Ira?
No, it's the other. I can't think what his name was now. And he was an old bachelor, and I don't think never did get married.
You said something about the Constitution being written by Bill Murray, wasn't it?
That's right.
What about the Constitution? What do you think about it now?
Well, I think it's still good myself. Bill Murray was made the president of the Constitutional Convention to draw up the Constitution for the new state, and I noticed in several of these books that they compliment him on his Constitution. Of course, he had a lot of help, but still, I think they give him credit for being
the spark plug behind it.
That's right, and there were several things that was put into the Constitution that are still good now. One thing was of letting the people vote on things that the legislature did if the people wanted to verify it, or if they wanted to turn it down, they could take it back to a vote of the people, and we still do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about your father, who was in the government up there? Can you tell me about him?
He was in the legislature from 1912. That was the year that I was married. The reason I remember it is that my husband and I had a store out in the country store, and it burned down.
Uh-oh. And
so we had to call him from Oklahoma City to tell him about our store burning up, and that was in 1913.
Mm-hmm.
So he was in 2 terms, I believe. His picture's in the Capitol building. I haven't found his name in any of these books, but
it's up there.
His picture is, yeah.
Well, some other history of Oklahoma. Do you remember any other significant incidents that happened that you could tell us about? Like a great fire? Significant incidents that happened that you could tell us about? Like a great fire or a new railroad coming through?
Maybe you better stop that and just thinking.
This is Northcutt. Could you tell me something about the first radio that you heard?
Well, the first radio that we had in our home was a marvel to me, because when I was growing up, we had no modern conveniences or inventions that they have now. The only thing resembling a radio at all was the old Edison machine with a cylinder on that played music. You could call it music. And the first one we had in our home didn't seem to impress my children at all.
Why is that?
Well, I guess they just had seen so many things, new things coming all the time, and it wasn't anything new or wonderful to them. They would, the first time I ever had a program, when I heard the President of the United States, I wanted the children to come and hear him, and they just weren't interested at all. It wasn't wonderful to them like it was to me.
Well, going back to Oklahoma history, you said something about Oklahoma history in school being a cinch. Why is that?
Well, Oklahoma history to me, I had grown up with Oklahoma history. It was in the making all the time. In fact, I didn't have to study Oklahoma history take Oklahoma history till I took my first examinations to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. We didn't have Oklahoma history in the school till around 1910 or 12. And when they did, well, all of us then knew, we had grown up with it, we knew it anyway without studying a book about it.
I see.
Oklahoma has a wonderful heritage. The people that came to Oklahoma were pioneers, they were good people, and no one needs to be ashamed of being from Oklahoma.
How about the Jim Crow law? Can you tell a little bit about that?
Well, I think that our Constitution, Oklahoma Constitution, is the only one that had this Jim Crow law written into it. And the man who wanted it done, making separate waiting rooms in railroad stations and also separate coaches on trains for colored and white people, was Jim Crow, and that's why they named it Jim Crow law. So they did keep the colored people and the white people from riding in trains in the same coach, and or waiting even in the depots in the same waiting rooms. I think we've come a long way from that, and I'm glad that the United States has seen fit to do away with that law.
It's slowly going out of passing.
Oh yes,
slowly going out, right?
I think in another 10 years, why, there won't be anything thought about at all.
Well, I have something here by A. Whitney Griswold. He says, "We are the best informed generation that ever lived, with most primitive ideas of what to do with our information. We know how to blow up the world, but we do not know how to govern it. Could you give us some words of advice, or what you think that we could pass on before we close this place?"
Well, I think it all depends on the individual, on you and me and each person. If every individual would govern themselves according to the Bible commandments, there wouldn't be any trouble in governing the world.
Thank you, Mrs. Northcutt. This has been a tape recording taken by Gary Hartsell, a senior in Ardmore High School, 1956.